Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton Sudut Pandang secara langsung dari studio Awani Bukit Kewangan Kuala Lumpur. Malam ini saya ingin berbicara tentang isu antarabangsa tetapi masih lagi dalam bentuk wilayah di Asia Tenggara, dan oleh itu saya ingin meminta izin untuk berbicara dalam bahasa Inggeris because tonight I have an international audience with me. First of all, I would like to introduce a very renowned expert on the international issue from Malaysia is Tan Sri Muhammad Jawhar Hassan. He's the CEO and the chairman of ISIS Malaysia, and I'm very honoured to have on the show Associate Professor Simon Tay from the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, but he's also on the law faculty of the National University of Singapore. Thank you so much for making it here on Sudut Pandang. I guess why we're having this discussion is because from tomorrow we're going to have the Asia Pacific Roundtable ongoing for 3 days at the Sheraton Imperial Kuala Lumpur. A lot of issues going to be talked about ASEAN, East Asia, Asia itself. But for tonight, I would like to kickstart with the issue of Myanmar. I know there's a lot of debate saying that Myanmar is not the only issue and we should move beyond, you know, holistically. But how do we decide on this? If we were to move on, how do we keep Myanmar at the side? Or if we want to settle it once and for all, what are the choices? So I would like to put that first question to Associate Professor Simon Tay. I've read a few of your articles, and you have said that in the world of globalization, when somebody swam across the lake to the house of Aung San Suu Kyi, who is actually under house arrest technically, and Aung San Suu Kyi didn't turn him away because he said that he was very exhausted already, so out of humanitarian, on the humanitarian ground, giving him refuge. But suddenly, now it becomes a court case, and people all over the world, from New York right up until Australia, has been giving their opinions on this, and ASEAN credibility is at stake because once again, sometimes the Western media will see it again. ASEAN didn't do much in this case. How would you see it? Because from tomorrow morning, you'll be the ASEAN chair for ASEAN ISIS. Sorry, the chair for ASEAN ISIS.
Well, I think I can't speak for ASEAN ISIS as a whole, but clearly the ASEAN governments have spoken. I mean, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and particularly Indonesia have made it very clear to their colleagues in Myanmar that this is beyond the pale. The member generals say that, you know, no one's above the law. Of course, no one's above the law. But there are times when governments resort to abusing the law. It may be a silly law or a very harsh use of the law for political reasons, and we must be able to say that this is not the case. And so ASEAN governments have united and spoken. Now, of course, further away in the West, they may even use harsher words, stronger thoughts. But who really can change the mind of the Myanmar generals?
It's even more imperative now, Tan Sri Jawhar, because that's the ASEAN Charter, and a lot is expected from having ASEAN as a legal entity, for example. Where do you think we can go from there?
Well, I think on issues like Myanmar, ASEAN actually is doing quite a bit, depending on, I mean, if you consider the fact that it is a forum of governments. I think if you look at the stand that ASEAN has taken, jointly with, for instance, recently, last week, ASEAN-EU had a joint statement on Myanmar, very strong, in Hanoi. And then ASEAN ministers, foreign ministers, informal statement in Phnom Penh. Individually, ASEAN governments, Singapore and Malaysia and all that, have come out with very strong statements. I think the governments have gone as far as they can. Now, as far as the ASEAN Charter goes, I think it kind of draws a line on certain issues, but you can still interpret it to go further. I think if really something really awful happens in Myanmar, I think ASEAN will go the limit. I think the ASEAN summit will finally decide on some quite, very significant step forward for ASEAN. But until that happens, which means massive genocide in Myanmar, etc., I think ASEAN will be forced to act, and they will go to the limit in the ASEAN Charter, take it up at the leaders level ASEAN summit, and they will decide, and probably they'll take some harsh measures. But until that happens, I think ASEAN has gone as far as it can. It won't, for instance, suspend or much less expel Myanmar, because the costs can be greater than the benefits. So I think this is as far as ASEAN government can go. But of course we have to use various instruments. One, ASEAN governments. Two, NGOs, civil society. We have to use media. We have to use countries further away like US, Europe, etc. I think if we work in concert, there can be collective pressure upon Myanmar to do as much as it can. Given the fact that it is a strong state, it's not going to lie down and change just because there's external pressure.
So, Professor, you go around the world jet setting here and there. You've been traveling for the past few days, and when you meet people from outside, how do you convince that we need to do this the ASEAN way, with history taken into perspective? We don't want to, have more negative costs. If we expel them, then there's no engagement, and that might be worse. But there's a lot of pressure on seeing ASEAN since its inception as only a talk shop. But we here in ASEAN, maybe we see it different, but people from outside, it's easy for them to say that it's just talking and not walking the talk, for example. How do you convince them?
That's a very good question. I'm actually based in New York this year at the Asia Society, which is a very well-known institution. And there, we find that the new Obama administration have been thinking about engaging Myanmar in a new way, because they fundamentally recognize that sanctions have not worked. Now, they're not saying that suddenly the ASEAN way over the last few years also has worked.
Yes.
Both sides, I think, have become to the realization that what we've been doing is certainly not enough to effect change. And I think both sides are coming to a more humble realization. Now, if you remember last year, 2 years ago, the Saffron Revolution.
Yes.
The statements by ASEAN were strong. In the run-up to the ASEAN summit, the UN Special Envoy Gambari, all these things. Singapore, when we were chairing, my Foreign Minister George Yeo actually paid visits to Indonesia, to China, to Japan, to India, to rally support, to put pressure on Myanmar. We have not achieved it. If we look forward to next year, we realize that Myanmar itself has set a deadline for elections. So what is at stake? It's not just this immediate furore, this cause of this man swimming across the lake. But we must think at least in terms of the next few months as we approach this roadmap for democracy. We will have to talk to the Myanmaris, find ways to convince them but also pressure them that this road must be a genuine road.
Okay. I have to go for the first commercial break, but once we are back, I'm going to go to Tan Sri, because Malaysia has played a lot of, I've done a lot of efforts on this. Tan Sri Razali's efforts alone has been acknowledged, but what more can we do? Because, at the end of the day, it's managing perception too. And if we were to be negotiating with EU or America under the new administration as a bloc, then they will always point to Myanmar and say, where's the democratic rights there? If we want to negotiate with you on the new trade terms, for example, we're going to bring this in too. So how do we, negotiate? In Malay we say that if you want to pull a thread out of the flour, but you just pull the thread, but don't disturb the flour. Can we do that in Myanmar's case? We'll discuss that after this short break.